All right. So, in today's topic, we're going to be talking about automation. Okay. Now, let's see. Thank you. Getting some DMs here. Yes, you can use all of these resources. You're able to copy them. Yep, thank you, Keith. Fix that. Okay, awesome. So I think we're good to go. Now, let's talk about some cybersecurity and automation in security. Now, when you think of the term automation in security, first things first, when you think of automation in cybersecurity, what are the first things that come to mind? Please go ahead and answer in that thread. When you think of automation in cybersecurity, what are the first things that come to your mind? Some people typing. Oh, Abdul says AI. Uh-huh. Tasks that are running daily without human intervention. Andre with the response. Threat detection and response. Paul says automatic processing, more AI, detection and action automatically. Incident response, Pardeep says. Technologies, self-replicating. Okay. Reducing human error, Pranav says. Okay. Everyone is essentially hitting the nail on the head. So we'll define automation here in very broad terms because we'll dig into it in later slide. But the thing that I want you all to think about here when it comes to automation is efficiency. What makes it easier? What makes it more efficient? Unfortunately, a lot of you have already picked up at this point that because 80% of cybersecurity incidences happen because of human interaction, or human error, well, then reducing that human error can really make things a lot more efficient, which is why automation exists. The entire idea here is with security automation, is we want to understand how it impacts cybersecurity and then how exactly it differs from what we call manual security. We'll talk about that a little later, but in short, manual security is before automation, before any type of technology existed to help humans save time and energy. And you'll see the humanistic impact of all of this later on. We will do a very clear definition of orchestration versus automation. This is something that's important because you may or may not get this as a question. I think I remember one automation question when I did my Sec Plus, but it's very important to understand the differences there. Now, you might be trying to think, okay, so why do we need to have automation? Why is this important? Well, one of the reasons that it's really on the rise to have more automation is because there are more threats that are rising. Now, these threats in cybersecurity, they're always evolving. They're never just staying the same. Sure, phishing is still a huge threat that exists in cybersecurity. However, the way that phishing is being done today is completely different. So now they're using a lot more automation. They're being a lot more pinpointed. They're using a lot of AI and their own automations to find more information about you as a person. Now, let me put it this way. Just like how ChatGPT exists, where it looks at all of the available databases, there is talk of some AIs out there that also exist, but have their database on you. That means it's connected to OSINT as well as private servers, and they're able to build a whole profile about you in seconds. Now, that may or may not be available to the governments already. However, the fact of the matter is that these tools are forever changing. They're forever evolving. So If you have threats that evolve, well, then you need to have resources to combat those threats. Those resources need time and energy in order to combat those threats. That means that they can't be spending their time doing all the manual work that manual security would imply. Now, the very fact that automation exists means that it helps make the security teams a lot faster. They can react a lot quicker. We'll talk about that later on. And then they are essentially able to leverage more of their time to combat the more priority level items, right? So in this lesson, we're essentially going to go ahead and talk about understanding what automation is. We're talking about implementing it and how do we maximize the entire concept of automation and orchestration. Okay? Ooh, Richard asked a really, really good question. So you're saying, Richard is asking, when an AI acts, who is essentially in charge, right? I think that's, or who essentially monitors it. Okay. Now, I do want to talk about this because I know that we're going to get a lot of questions about AI and what exactly AI means and how it plays into automation. Well, I can tell you this. One of the key things that comes with AI is a risk, right? There's a huge risk involved with AI. And so when you're trying to understand how AI is tracked and who actually governs it, well, there are a lot of ways it can go, but the easy answer, it's the governing body of that AI, and it's the government entity that that country lives in. There are some countries out there that have a really good system that's able to monitor and track AI and their outcomes. Typically, it's the AI companies themselves, right? But then there are governments who have the ability to monitor what that output is. An example, if any of you have ever heard of an AI tool called DeepSeek. So DeepSeek is essentially China's answer to ChatGPT. The benefit of DeepSeek is that it is completely free. Now, I did spend some time in China, and it is such a fascinating and interesting case because China, specifically when I was in Shanghai, if you're not aware, China has kind of like two separate mindsets. There's one part of China that it has what they call the Great Firewall. And the Great Firewall doesn't allow you to get on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram. It essentially doesn't allow you to connect to anything that is not controlled by China. When you land in China, you need a VPN in order to access all of those. And even so, VPNs are still being tracked. So the reason why I bring this up is because DeepSeek is an example of an AI that can output certain information, but the Chinese government and the AI governing company is the one that controls what that output is, or they'll tell the AI, hey, you can't say that. That's literally happened to me. When I was in China, I was very risky, and I looked up some things such as I looked up some things such as political things, such as like Taiwan and whatnot, and it wouldn't give me an answer because it was very, very political. And so that's an example of who controls the outcome of that AI, of the AI outputs, right? That being said, it can be government related, it can be just AI related. I do know that OpenAI, they do have an internal team that uses AI to audit AI, meaning anytime before AI puts out an output, it goes through a quote unquote QA system to make sure it's not putting out anything potentially dangerous. Now, when ChatGPT first came out, you were still able to get around stuff. So you could ask it dubious questions by saying, I'm doing this for a research paper, or what if I accidentally did this? How would I do it? Right now, they're a lot more stringent in that output. It is the individual government is controlled by. That's a really good look into it. Means AI company need to negotiate with the particular. So not all of the AI companies have to negotiate with the governments. Some of them do. For example, ChatGPT wasn't fully available in some countries in Europe. I think Germany had some issues with it. because of a privacy clause. In case you weren't aware, privacy is really, really important in Europe. And so they really made sure that OpenAI had all the right security and privacy controls, something that is directly applicable to what we've been learning, so that people can still use it. There were times where it was banned, but then reinstated because they updated all of their controls. So it depends. Some AI companies do have those controls and do have to work with the government, and then some of them don't. Chinese. Martial, yes, that is true. Alex, I don't. I will say that if you decide to use DeepSeek, that is at your own discretion. I do highly encourage you all to look at where your information goes and what you put into AI in DeepSeek, but not just DeepSeek. I encourage you all to look into the terms and conditions of any AI tool you have. Here's the benefit. You can use AI to audit AI. You can take the terms and conditions in a PDF and then tell AI, where are all the things that I should be concerned? And they have to tell you. It seems like it'll be AI versus AI in the hacking and protecting. Where do you come in as cybersecurity professionals? Oh, Peter with the fantastic question. Okay, so let me repeat this so everyone can see here. Peter is saying it looks like it's going to be AI versus AI when it comes to hacking and protecting. Where do cybersecurity professionals come in? If you all remember at the start of this class, I mentioned that cybersecurity is a humanistic industry and humanistic job. Remember, quiz time. What is the number one role? What is the number one role and goal in cybersecurity? Hopefully, you all still remember what I taught you. So the number one rule in cybersecurity is protecting human life. That is absolutely true. So, Peter, this is directly applicable to what I mean to you. AI cannot protect a human. AI cannot physically make sure that data isn't leaked. And if data is leaked, there needs to be a human to make certain decisions. Okay. So where you come in is you as cybersecurity professionals bring your intellect, bring your understanding, and you bring your humanity to this. Now, will AI be able to hack in the future? Sure. Is AI already being used to protect a lot? Yes. But in both these cases, they have to be initiated by a human, and then decisions have to be made by a human. You as humans are going to have to make decisions based on a lot of these hacks that come in and a lot of these new decisions that come in with AI. That is a very good question. Okay. Dan prompts on these AIs. But I'm not too familiar with Dan prompts, so apologies. I can't answer that, but I'll let one of the TAs look into that. I am so glad that you all remember that the number one goal in cybersecurity is to protect human life. That is accurate. Okay. We went down a little bit of a rabbit hole here. I love it when you all ask these questions because then we get to dig into the real stuff. Now, let's talk a bit more about the opposite of automation. The opposite of automation will be called manual security. Now, as you can imagine, the concept of manual security is just a human doing all of the work behind the scenes. Okay, that means that you're the one reading through the logs. You're the one essentially looking for a bunch of errors. You're the one who's reviewing and reading the code, QAing the code. You're reviewing every single deployment. You're deploying every single new update. Okay, so you're doing all of these things manually. Now, the reason why this is a lot is because as a cybersecurity professional, your time is incredibly valuable. You need to spend it not playing catch up. Because if you think of it, let's just pretend for a moment that every single one of you right now is a cybersecurity engineer at a company. And that company says, hey, we don't have the budget to automate a bunch of our tasks. Let's say one task. One task is patch management, meaning that you're going to need to update every single computer. You as the cybersecurity professional, even if you have a solution that automatically deploys the updates, means that you have to manually assign an update to each computer. Now imagine You have 700 Windows and like 500 Mac computers. You have to assign it to each one. Even the assigning process is manual. So that's where catch-up comes into play. Now, not only that, but you as a professional will be spending a lot of time on this and a lot of energy, which means that you will be tired. Okay. You'll be tired in the sense that you will spend a lot of, you'll be depleting yourself of these, doing these manual tasks as opposed to taking your time and making sure to focus on the things that have a priority. Not just that, but when you're doing things a lot more manually, such as patch management, you are prone to errors. As a human, there is a chance that you'll make an error at some point, and then that could impact a huge volume of your network, which could then need for you to do additional work, right? Now, with the concept of manual security, you will have to do a lot of this catch up work, but not just that. If your network grows, if you get more people into your system, well, then you will be limited by how fast you can scale. There are automation tools that help do that, which we'll talk about here in a bit. So all of this is manual, right? This is a complete manual process. Now, when we're talking about automation and orchestration, this is going to make your life so much easier because it gives you two of the most precious things back, which is your time and your energy. So then let's talk definitions. What exactly is automation and orchestration? So the way that I like to think of it, right? Security automation is essentially when you use a technology or a tool in order to make something more efficient, whether that be taking care of some manual tasks like log management or log review, whether that means detecting and responding to incidences. It means having to use a set of technology that doesn't require any human interaction. I think someone said that in the initial setup that we said, right? So you would have to make sure that you have all of these tools that take away the need for any manual work. It replaces all the manual work. Now, the term orchestration is essentially the coordination of all of these automated tasks, right? So the way I like to think of it is think of it as an orchestra. An automation is a single person or a group of people, and they're all playing, right? And then you have an entire orchestra, which is a group of people that are playing. A group of people that are playing is like an easy way to think of the orchestration of automation, right? You, as a cybersecurity professional, are the conductor. You have a little fancy wand, and you're letting each automation operate on its own, but it produces a whole entire resort, meaning an orchestra or orchestration. Because the technical definition of orchestration is just the coordination of different automated tools to make sure that you have a streamlined defense system. Streamlined is the key word here. So being the best information security analyst, blue team means automating as much as you can of the work. Alfin, that is a really great question. So yes and no. I say yes and no because you do want to automate as much work as possible so that you can take action on the things that can't be automated. If you have an automated threat detection and response tool, well, then they detect that threat, but you, as the blue team member or the security analyst, has to validate that tool. Sure, AI can say, hey, this is a credible threat. We're giving it the green check mark. But there's always a chance that AI could have a false positive. And so you have to validate it. So yes, you want to automate it, but you also want to have enough knowledge to be able to know if it is an actual threat or not. Very good question. So to summarize, automation is having a tool in place that doesn't require human intervention that has a positive effect on streamlining. Orchestration is like an orchestra where you have a bunch of automated security tools that create a streamlined system altogether. Okay. Now, some of the key points to remember here is that automation really helps when it comes to reducing human error, like we said, and it speeds up security. This is really important to understand. The concept of automation speeds up security because it enables the blue team specifically to respond and react to things a lot more quickly. Oh, Alfie, you're very welcome. Thank you for asking that question. Now, the idea here with orchestration is that it also ensures that if you have multiple automating tools, now keep in mind, orchestration is just the concept of coordinating multiple automated tools. So if you have an orchestration, it enables you to ensure the different security tools are working together effectively. The concept of orchestration doesn't mean, okay, this is an automation, this is an automation, I'm going to group it together. No, it's a concept of saying, okay, we have these 10 automations. These 3 automations have to work in sync together. So I have to make sure they have access to all the right data. These 3 automations are all working towards the same goal, but they need to have different access. So I need to make sure that they have the right access and that all of that. The concept of orchestration is ensuring that all the automations are functioning as they should and that they aren't quote unquote breaking. Think of it as like a project manager, a project manager that has a bunch of different projects, what are automations, and they're ensuring that they're being completed on time and on budget and whatnot. Okay. All right. Now, one of the other key concepts when it comes to security, operation, and automation is that when it comes to cyber threats, you're going to get a lot of, I would call it pings or hits that says, hey, you have this cyber threat, you have this cyber threat. Then you have to prioritize which one is an actual credible one and which one isn't. So having an automation in place makes you sure that you can say, okay, this one is low credibility, so we don't need to focus on that, but this one is high credibility, so that's what we can focus on. Automation really helps you differentiate that and prioritize it. Okay, I think we're pretty clear on those. So let's kind of dive a little deeper into the differences between the two, right? So when it comes to automation, right, like I mentioned before, patch management is a very good example of automation. I've worked at a company, like I think I told this class before, I worked at a company where you had no choice but to update when it tells you to update because it's automated. There's not there's not an actual human being that says, hey, we need to patch this. Instead, the system says, hey, we need to patch these things. I just need you to authorize for me to send it all out. Okay. Obviously, there are people who QA the update and QA the patch, but an automated tool really helps take away from that manual task labor. Okay. And then orchestration, the other example of this, it's the coordination of it. So an example is a response to a phishing attack. So there are multiple automated tools that can work together in order to find out if it's a phishing attack or not. So if there is a phishing attack and someone clicks a link, an automated system can say, hey, a malicious link was clicked. I'm automatically isolating it from the rest of the system. And since I notice that something has been clicked, well, then I'm going to go ahead and disable this user's passwords, all of them, so that they have to reset their password. And then I'm going to alert the cybersecurity team. So all of these are different automation tools, right? Automating systems that are all working together due to one specific trigger, if a phishing email is clicked. As you can see, these are 3 different automations, but they all have to work in sync, most likely one after another, to make sure that they function correctly, okay? So then you might be saying, all right, automation is the process of using technology to automate a specific task that doesn't involve human interaction. Orchestration is the concept of coordinating all of these different automated tasks so that it accomplishes one goal, right? So what are the specific differences between automation and orchestration? Now, on automation, I like to think of automation as a smaller part of orchestration because an automation builds the orchestration. You can't have an orchestration without the automation. So the automation is an individual task. Whereas an orchestration is essentially a workflow of tasks. A workflow is a very fancy term for a group of tasks. With automation, it's a single security tool. An example, automating the isolation of an infected device is a singular security tool or a singular security task. Okay. Now, when you combine all of these together, so 3 different security tasks or security tools, that would be the coordination of multiple tools. If you're picking up what we're putting down here, automation tends to be like one, orchestration tends to be many. Okay. How much human intervention is required? In automation, it's typically low. Now, I wouldn't say that it's completely zero because you do want to have some level of human interaction to initiate an automation or validate an automation, especially if it's going company wide. But then you also want to make sure that it doesn't have too much. Typically, it just involves someone validating, saying, "Hey, can you validate that we're releasing this specific update? Are there any issues? Nope. Okay, go ahead and automate that task." Now, with orchestration, you do need to have a human define the flow and any sort of dependencies that would be required for the tasks to work together. So, in order for these tasks to work together, they all have to have access to a system that detects if there is an issue. Well, that access and that connection is a dependency. So a human needs to make sure to have that in place. Now, these are 2 examples, patch management, as well as responding to a phishing email. I think we're pretty covered there. Okay? I think that kind of answers it pretty well. How are we doing on time? Okay, we're good. So what are some specific use cases that could be used for automation and for automation? Well, I'll tell you this right now that one of the biggest things that comes with having an organization working at a company is personnel, having human assets that are resources or employees, right? So when you have employees that enter a new workplace, there's a lot of work that has to be done. Not only do they have to be ramped up as employees, but from a technical standpoint, you have to get them a new computer. You need to make sure that they have access to all the right things. You need to make sure that you have tracking for them. This is what we call user provisioning. It means creating a specific user account and when an employee joins, and then making sure they have access to everything. Now, that being said, even when people are entering a company, same thing goes for when they're leaving a company. If they're leaving a company, you have to do the same exact thing again, except you have to disable all of their information. So the user provisioning process is a very manual process if you don't have something in place, that automatically detects and allows it to function. So with user provisioning, right, you can have a specific automation in place so that it can detect when a new employee joins. So if a new employee joins, well, then a human will initially say, "Hey, this new employee has joined," and they upload all of their information. A very common tool here that has a lot of APIs, so we'll talk about APIs later, and a lot of connection points, is something called Workday. Workday is a tool that is used by a lot of companies when it comes to HR, because you can upload an employee's full information, and from there, that database can be connected to by a lot of different automation resources, right? So what Workday can do is once it gets uploaded into Workday, well, then they have tools that enable them to say, okay, now that an employee has been entered into Workday, what's their start date? They're starting on June 1st. Okay, well then a week beforehand, let's make sure to get their access up. Let's make sure to know what are all the things they need access to. And keep in mind, this is all happening in the back end. This is all technology that's happening in the back end to automatically give access or automatically revoke access, depending on who the resource is. So when you automate the user provisioning process, this enables you to help prioritize other items. So this is user provisioning, so creating an account. Resource provisioning is just getting them access to the different things they need to do their work, such as the network, different tools on the network, anything like that. It's very similar to user provisioning. Then we have what we call guardrails. So a guardrail is essentially a policy or a set of quote unquote boundaries or safe boundaries that you can set to that specific employee. So an example, a guardrail is not allowing employees to search dubious websites. So this could be adult sites, this could be websites that are known to be malicious, this can be even some HTTP sites. All of these are examples of sites that you don't want to have employees get access to. So you have guardrails that essentially say, hey, I see you trying to access this site, you should not be going there, or hey, going here. Another example is using Facebook. So a lot of companies are pretty lax now, and they'll let you be on social media. That there are other companies, such as government companies, government contractors, or contractors that work with different organizations that don't allow you to get on social media. So that guardrail essentially helps you keep from violating that policy. Typically, they'll come with a specific policy saying, hey, you're trying to access this site, that's not allowed, please don't access it. That's an example of a guardrail. Now, why? Why are guardrails required? Not only is it to protect you as a company and the employee, but there's a compliance component to it. When you set guardrails in place, well, then you're essentially telling any standard, hey, I'm not allowing my employees to access certain things that could compromise my network. Okay. And the last one is security groups. Now, this is something that you will need to know as a company, because a security group, or as individuals, because what a security group is a policy that defines who has access to specific data or specific systems. Security groups is used a lot in a lot of different companies. And so it's definitely something you should know. Typically, it's associated with what we call Azure. So if you're unfamiliar, I think everyone should have an idea what Azure is right now. But Azure is essentially Microsoft version of cloud computing, and you can create security groups and put them in different departments and sub-departments, and that's what you use to reference if they're trying to access a certain system or tool. Think of it in very simple terms as the book of who has access to what. That book says, all right, let me see here. Wayne, Dan, and Keith are all new employees, but they're all in different departments. All of them are in different IT teams. Well, then I would put them in each of their own different security groups. Since they're in each of those different security groups, well, then they can only have access to that specific security group's scope of access. They cannot have access to any more. So security groups, in essence, is in reference to a principle that we've talked about before. What is security groups? What does security group help with? Which principle? So in that thread, which principle does the concept of security groups help with? I see it. There it is. Martin, Pranav, Romina, Saiba, Umar, you all get golden star. Well done, you too, Keith. Everyone here gets golden star. That is correct. Security groups are one of the best ways in order to initiate and keep the principle of least privilege, because you're making sure that you and other people only have access to the things that you should have access to. Good job, everyone. All right, so what are some other ways that you can automate? Well, one of the best ways that you can automate is something called ticket creation and escalation. So this is common in the IT world, meaning that in IT, actually, if I remember, you all like it when I zoom in. So let me zoom in a little bit more here. So when it comes to ticket creation and escalation, if this is your first time hearing about ticket automation, anytime you have an issue in IT, or maybe you have you have emailed in for whatever reason, well then a ticket is created. The concept of a ticket is helpful because that's how you track all the work that you have to do. Think of it as like that Eisenhower matrix. Anytime someone emails you and says, hey, I have this issue, a ticket is created where you can document what happened, and then you can document the time it took in order to complete it, as well as the steps taken, so that you have a documentation or something in writing of what you had done in the past. Now, the concept with ticket creation and escalation is that you can automate this tool. It helps because then it can create a support ticket, it can assess the severity, and then it can escalate it to the appropriate teams. Think of it this way. If you've ever called into a phone company and they said, hey, what is your account number? What is your phone number? What is your name? What is your issue? Will any of these things solve it? You say no. They say, okay, I'll get you to the right representative. Typically, that's a whole automation process so that when you get to the representative, they just get a screen with all your information and they don't have to go through the process of asking you all that stuff again. So that's the whole point of ticket creation, is tracking it as well as making the response process a lot more efficient. Continuous integration and testing just means that if there are new changes that are introduced into the system, or maybe there is some testing that needs to happen, well, then you can essentially integrate that testing process or automate that entire testing process so that you can ensure any problems are caught early. Now, this is a bit more complex, and we don't need to dive too much into it because since you are doing a lot of testing, typically you'd want to have a human involved in order to make sure that it's not quote unquote breaking anything. Sure, it's in a QA environment, but still. Managing services and continuous integration, all this means is that you have different services, you have different tools that you use for your daily operations, and you want to make sure that all of them are running correctly. You want to make sure that all of them are running smoothly, they don't have any issues. One of the best ways to do that is to do what we call managed service audit. So you have an auditing system, which is typically automated, where it does a check, just a health check on all of your running systems. Is it running as expected? Are there any outages? Are there any odd things that we're seeing in these systems? So this is an automated step that allows you to essentially say, okay, we're still good, so we don't have any quote unquote issues. And then we have the utilization of APIs. Now, if you've never heard of an API, that stands for an application application product interface, okay? Where essentially you can do quote unquote anything. An API is really, really powerful. We'll dig into that a little more later, okay? So why do they ask for all that stuff again when you get to the human? Not a real question. Oh, Brian, I see what you're saying. A lot of the time, they're just trying to validate that you are who you are. They're just trying to think of it as like two-factor authentication. They won't ask for everything, but they'll essentially try to make sure they have the right information. What are the security orchestration best tools? That is a big question, Wajiha. There are a lot of different security orchestration tools out there. Now, they're not ubiquitous. There are so many that exist. I know CrowdStrike has one. I know that Cisco and Palo Alto have some because they have to do a lot for networking. It is very, very vast. What automation choose a team what does automation choose a team based on least privilege? You might have to expand on that a bit more, Peter. I'll let one of the TAs have that. Amazon IT would ignore you if you didn't have a ticket. Now I understand why. Ha! Huzzah! We have a light bulb moment. That is correct, Karina. If any of you ever go to an IT team or to anyone and you say, hey, I have this issue, one of the first things they'll ask you is, have you submitted a ticket? Right? So the entire idea here, it's not just because they're trying to be annoying or they're trying to make your life difficult, they're trying to make both your lives easier. With a ticket, they've already been given the information and they can help you quicker. That's the entire concept of automation. Okay. All right, now let's talk about boosting security posture. As a reminder, security posture is just the overall security strength of your organization. So where do you stand from a cybersecurity standpoint? That's the entire concept of it, right? So when we're talking about the benefits of automation, there are several we want to keep in mind. One of those being efficiency, and time saving. All this means is that when you have some tasks that are automated, well, then you as a human have to do far less. When you have to do far less, that frees up your time to focus on the things that are more important, that have more priority, that are more strategic for the organization. Now, the entire idea here is that it helps you complete those more important tasks faster, and then you don't have to worry about those minute manual details as much. The other benefit is that it does enforce baselines. Now, if you remember, a baseline is like the foundational, okay, everything is functioning as normal. Everything is functioning at an operational standard, right? The idea here is that when you're using automation tools, well, then all of these tools, because they're technical, they typically document everything. They typically make sure that they have all that information in place so that you know, hey, everything's operating to normal. If it's not operating to normal, now we know why, okay? So this really does help with preventing deviations. And then if you do see a deviation, you know that the deviation is real because you have a solid baseline from the automation tools. Now, one thing that automation tools need in order to function properly is uniformity. So with uniformity, that means that you need to have a standard when implementing or configuring different networks. That means that if you are configuring a new router or a new, let's say a new switch or a new server, even if it's a data server, email server, what have you, typically a standard means that you have like a template. You have a certain naming convention. You have a certain workflow of how you set it up. You have a certain place where you put that specific router. Everything needs to be quote unquote standardized because then it makes it more efficient and easy and consistent in order for the automated tools to know exactly where to look at something. It also reduces the risk of configuration errors because if you're going to have any of these automation tools make configurations, first of all, you should always have an admin double check before those configurations are done. But if you do have an automated tool doing that, it already has a template and standard that it can go off of. Scaling securely, it just means that as your organization grows, automating things, the automations help it grow a lot more securely and a lot faster because they're just automatically adding new resources and they're being protected from the start. Now, this might be an odd one. Some of you might be saying, well, why does employee retention, why is that positive? How does automation help with that? This is where the humanistic part comes in. When you automate a lot of tools, well, then your employees get to focus on the things that are less boring, less manual, and less administrative. Instead, they get to focus on the interesting things. They get to focus on things that they want to focus on. And the benefit of that is they get a higher satisfaction and a lower burnout rate. Burnout happens when you have to do a lot of repetitive tasks that you don't enjoy, okay? These tend to be monotonous tasks. So when employees have workloads that are actually on things that interest them and they like to do, they're just happier. Something that should be pretty evident here is that when you have automation tools in place, well, then you have what we call improved reaction time. Because you have so many things that are automated and you get so much information on the onset, well, then you can react to things a lot quicker. The idea here is, for example, that phishing email breach that we talked about. Once someone clicks a link, well, then the system already knows that something happened. So they isolate it, they let the security team know, they send out a password reset. These are all automated and fast. When it comes to security incidences, time is of the essence. The more you wait, the slower you are, the higher chance of that incident spreading and getting a lot worse. So you want to reduce the damage and you want to limit the impact. Remember, impact is one of the big things that we want to limit in cybersecurity because it's not if you get hacked, it's when. But if you lower the likelihood that you get hacked and if you lower the impact, well, then it's a lot easier for you, okay? When you have a lot of automation tools, it reduces the impact and because it allows the security teams to respond a lot more quickly. Workforce multiplier, it just means that if you have automation set in place, well, then your security team is a lot stronger and they can handle a lot more complex tasks. Excuse me. What culture behavior shifts are needed within security teams to embrace automation? Is there resistance to trusting machines? Ooh, that is a very deep question there, Richard, but I like it. I'll say this. A lot of cybersecurity and IT resources love automation because we just want to work on interesting things. We want to work on things that actually, quote unquote, matter. So a lot of them really like automation because that means they don't have to do a bunch of log reviews. They don't have to manually patch different systems. That can all happen all at once from one integral system. That being said, a lot of IT resources also will not have any smart devices in their home because they don't trust any machines. AI, especially. Sure, they'll do it at work, but in their personal lives, not really. So the answer to that is there is already a culture of accepting automation, but there is resistance to automating everything from a security standpoint. Is it advisable to always automate patches since some of them require system restart? Kwabena, that's a really good question. So the idea here is it's not fully advisable. Take example what happened with CrowdStrike when they impacted all the Windows computers that brought it down. That was because a patch that was automated was not fully vetted and it did not function well with the Windows update. Okay. So you don't want to automate all of it. You want to make sure that you QA it properly and that you have prepared accordingly. Okay. So it's kind of like half automating it. Right now, what they have is they have a QA before the QA, and one of the QAs is automated, one of the QAs is not. Some of these companies will QA a patch and then put it in like a AI testing environment, and then they have an actual human QA as well. And then if they both come to the right conclusion, then they'll release it. That's the entire QA process that happens right now. All right, let's do some of these quiz questions and then we will go ahead and take a break. Quiz thread. What would you do to automate and orchestrate if a company you work for runs on legacy systems? Legacy systems would not be able to automate very well. So the first thing I would do is convince the CEO to buy non-legacy systems, or else we are more likely to be hacked. That being said, sometimes you can't get around it, and sometimes you do have to do a lot of manual. There are some. I know that I say a lot of things about the healthcare industry and how they tend to be an easy target, but it's true. A lot of them have legacy systems. So some things are orchestrated and some things are automated, but then some things are still manual. Sometimes you just have to print something and then scan it. So there is a combination of both. All right, all of you are answering the quiz question. Everyone is saying B. Well done, everyone. That is correct. Now, second question. Which of the following actions does security orchestration focus on? A, B, C, or D? A lot of people are saying B again, coordinating and integrating multiple security tools. That is correct. So the idea with orchestration, it has multiple automated tools that it is coordinating. Thank you all so much for answering in the thread. Okay, so we talked a lot about orchestration, we talked a lot about automation, we talked about the differences. We'll dig into a bunch of these other elements here in a bit. But for now, let's go ahead and do the duck timer. Here's the duck thread. Okay, now let's dig a little more into the concept of orchestration. Now, One of the first things to understand about orchestration is that it is the process of coordinating a bunch of different automations, right? Now, when it comes to coordinating it, that means that it needs to make sure that they all have the right access, they're all connected. Do they have certain dependencies? These are all different things that we need to keep in mind when it comes to orchestration because we need to make sure they work together efficiently. The concept of coordinating means that um, they have to be streamlined and they have to be operational. That's the entire point here. A lot of these automation tools, they tend to work together. I love the concept of the phishing email when that link gets clicked. Well, then you have a tool that monitors literally all the clicks that exist in your network. Is that a lot of data? Yes, it is. Can a human go through all of it in any given amount of time? No, they cannot. So technology essentially makes that process so much easier. Now, something to also keep in mind is I said that orchestration is a process of collaborating and coordinating a bunch of automated tools, right? Keep in mind, I didn't just say automated security tools. The idea with orchestration is that they're not just orchestrating security specific tools, but they also have to orchestrate non-security tools. These can be any sort of tools that require a connection to the security tool. Something like a firewall, different intelligence feeds, maybe even endpoint protection. So an endpoint protection can be the one that actually disables the device or isolates it from the rest of the network. These are all examples of very specific security tools, but then there could be some vendor tools that they have to have connected with it or they have to work together with it. A very common example is one I mentioned before, Workday. It's the HR tool that has all of the employee data. Now, if you have, let's say, a security tool, well, then a security tool says, hey, someone just clicked this malicious link. Who is this person? That security tool needs access to Workday. So it says, okay, this is their name. They clicked on it. Well, then now I have to isolate them. Which department are they at? Okay, who is their direct manager? I have to alert their direct manager. They clicked on a phishing email. So all of this can be done because they're connection to a non-security tool such as Workday. Now, remember, a workflow is just a fancy way of saying like making it all work together, right? So you typically will have a lot of different processes that will work in conjunction with all these different automations, right? Now, a security analyst might use what we call a security email gateway and threat intelligence platform to understand what essentially happened during that phishing email click. Okay, this is what we call SecOps or security operations. These are typically blue team or security operations resources that review all this type of information to assess a threat or to respond to a threat. Now, in this case, it's really important to understand that security operations is one of the most one of those important jobs at a company because you're literally protecting a client or your own company and you're putting forth the effort to validate if a threat is an actual threat or not. Okay. Now, the unified workflow here, the unified idea of orchestration is having a bunch of different tools work together to give you a unified platform or unified dashboard. So that is the really nice thing to have is like a dashboard that shows you all the information from all these automation tools that you can make an informed decision on. So you might be telling me, okay, if this security analyst has a secure email gateway, they have access to the antivirus dashboard and information, and they have a threat intelligence dashboard, then how do all of these work together? This is where one of the most important terms comes to mind, and this is a term that everyone here needs to know, and that is an API. An API, in short, stands for an application programming interface. So an API, think of it as a really powerful element of any program that enables you to do almost anything. Here's an example. When I used to work at an email marketing company, we had the client And then the client had their own database, their own website, and then we were the actual email marketing company. So what we would do is we would give them an API, meaning that they would have a username and a password, and that API would make what we call API calls to our server. If it makes an API call to our server, that server reads that API call, and it's the API says, hey, I need this information. We send back that information. That is a very simple concept of using an application programming interface. Is there's a request that comes in, then we push out a specific response. What typically happens in this scenario is they request information about a specific contact or a specific client or customer, and then we send them back that specific information. Now, that being said, an API can do so much more than that. An API can make an automated task. It can coordinate different actions. It can tell a computer or a system to do a certain thing. It is very, very powerful. So you have to make sure to protect the credentials of your API to ensure that it works correctly. So an API is a really powerful tool that everyone should be aware of because from a security standpoint, it can be a plugin that can help integrate different technologies. So with that API, you can have different automations talk to each other. You can have them take specific actions, and it can even inform threat intelligence, okay? Because it can all happen in real time. All right, now we talked about the uniformity of it, right? Now, security orchestration is really great from an advantage standpoint because it enhances your security posture. When everything is uniform, when everything is automated, you can then say, all right, my resources are happy, they're working on things that matter, that are important, they don't have to review logs. Well, then what are the other benefits of security orchestration? Well, I can tell you this. One of the benefits is a faster incident response. With security orchestration, you aggregate a bunch of information. You typically have a dashboard of all your systems. And then from there, if you're able to see everything from a bird's eye view, well, then you can respond to things a lot more quickly. So this is why incident response is very time oriented and how orchestration can inform all of that, those decisions. Something I want to bring up here. You've heard me say multiple times in class that you have to identify and know what your network is, know what your systems are, know what data you're holding, know where that data has been held, right? As you can see here, data is really, really important. Data informs everything, especially in the case of orchestration. When you have the right data in place and when you have the right automated tools in place, it gives you a bunch of information so that you can make an informed decision on what steps to take, okay? This is why incident response is so time-oriented and why we want to make sure that all of the human resources get to spend time on the things that matter as opposed to on the things that are a little more difficult or that are a little more manual, per se, right? So that's also a reason why it's important that we see the impact of orchestration in MTTRs. So MTTR stands for mean time to respond. Why is this measured and why is this numerical? For multiple reasons. For one, internally, you want to have a mean time to respond that it fits within an appropriate scale, right? So you don't want your mean time to respond to be really long. You want that response time to be a lot lower, okay? Because when you have orchestration, well, then it minimizes the need to do repetitive tasks. They're all handled by automation tools. So you respond a lot more quickly and you reduce your MTTR. Reducing your MTTR is not just a benefit for you internally, but you can also, quote unquote, brag about it to your customers, clients, stakeholders. Say, hey, we have an incident response team. We have an MTTR that has remained steadily at, let's say, an hour or 30 minutes or what have you. And we aim on keeping it, making it shorter, and it's thanks to security orchestration, okay? Integrated security tools. Now, security orchestration means that you're going to work with multiple security systems. Obviously, any security tool is going to have to work with a network. So you want to make sure that you have certain networks in place, and that you have certain routers, you have information that you can give to any orchestration tools. The entire idea here is collaboration among the tools and making sure they're working together as effectively and efficiently as possible. Take the opposite. If you have orchestration, but you don't do a good job coordinating, well, then that could cause a huge problem. Because now, instead of your orchestration strategy saving you time and saving the employees time, well, then you're instead spending more time fixing what wasn't initially set up well. So when you're building an orchestrated network or an orchestrated security system, you want to make sure from the very beginning, at the very start, that you're not going to make it more work for people down the line. All right. Real-time visibility. Remember when I mentioned APIs? APIs are really powerful because they can inform a lot of information and they can give a lot of details. When you're using APIs, they tend to send a lot of data really quickly and it can be seen in real time. An example, back to the marketing part. When you're shopping somewhere, right? And then you get an email saying, hey, you shop for this. These are some other features that you might be interested in. That is real-time personalization because they took the data that they have from you and what you're looking at on the website, and then they feed you specific information based off what you browsed. So that's quote unquote real-time visibility. If you take that into the cybersecurity standpoint, well then as a security analyst, you can open up a security dashboard and then at a glance see the health level of all of your systems, all of your servers, just at a glance on a dashboard because it is real time. Real time is really helpful because then it helps you detect and address any issues that pop up, as well as validate any issues that pop up. Threat hunting. So if you're unfamiliar with threat hunting, it is the concept of scanning your network, doing research on your systems, or essentially looking through your assets to see if there are any threats that exist in your network or any of those assets that you need to address or that need to be mitigated, right? So when you automate this process, this can essentially do what we call proactive detection. Now, the automated process of doing threat hunting, it's kind of an interesting concept because a lot of security professionals, they love the concept of threat hunting. They love poking around. They love trying to do internal searches to see if they can find any certain threats. I contracted for a company where the security team, they had like bounties. They said, okay, this week we have to find, we are implementing this new software or we're patching this, and we have a group of 4 individuals who are going to be competing against each other to see who finds the most threats first. So the idea here is that they like to find them manually because it involves a lot of like specific tactics, a lot of scanning. However, it does take manpower. So a lot of companies will use an automation to simply scan the tools. Now, when they scan the tools and when they scan the system, scan the network, that scan is also going to leverage the baseline that was had. That baseline says, hey, this is how everything should be functioning. So it'll give it a green light. Everything still looks the same. But if there's an oddity or if they see a certain weirdness, well, then that will give it a spike. That spike will then say, oh, that person needs to look into it, which is threat hunting. But the idea is that it is more efficient. I will say, however, a lot of cybersecurity professionals do enjoy threat hunting. On consistent incident handling. Now, as you can imagine, incident handling is really important and there needs to be a uniform templated process in order to handle it, right? So when you have an orchestration process that is uniform, that everyone knows, well, then it reduces the amount of errors and improves the security posture of the company in itself. The entire idea here with orchestration is harmony. You want harmony, you want efficiency, and you want to make sure that the tools are working efficiently together to raise your security posture. How often are automation tools updated? Would it be based on software patches updates? Very good question, Peter. Automations have automated updates. I would say that's the easiest way to think about it, because an automation can be can need an update depending on what automation tool it is. For example, the one that monitors all of the clicks on the network and then isolates one based on that click, it would probably need to be updated based on the type of link that is clicked. Because like I mentioned before, a lot of cybersecurity threats, they evolve, they change. Since they evolve and change, we need to evolve and change any automation or tools that we have to have that change and have that evolution listed there within. Okay? So they should be updated often, and they typically are updated automatically, but sometimes humans get involved. All right. How do they both match up? So we're talking about automation and orchestration, right? And we kind of looked a little deeply into what each of them play into. Automation tends to be singular, and orchestration tends to be multiple. In this case, we're going to be talking about security automation and security orchestration. So first things first, when I was talking about security automation, we're talking still about the individual task, but in this case, it's very individual security tools task. This is very security oriented. Now, when we're talking about security orchestration, this is talking about security tools and security automations on top of non-security tools. Why? Because we need non-security tools that could be dependencies to inform the security automations. So that's why the orchestration piece, even though it's security minded and security oriented, it still needs to give access to non-security oriented or non-security tools for the automations to work properly. As far as the scope, these security automations, they tend to be a single tool or a single system, whereas security orchestration, it's a lot bigger in scope. They tend to have multiple security tools. And in terms of complexity, the automations are, it says here, it's less complex to implement and maintain. However, you should understand that any automation tool is going to need some level of configuration and going to have some level of permissions. These automation tools can be pretty complex. They can be pretty sophisticated depending on what you're trying to do. But as you can imagine, if you have multiple security automations, well, then that's a level of complexity entirely in and of its own. Now, that's why security orchestrations says that it's more complex to implement as well as maintain, because you're working with a bunch of different moving parts. Now, with security automation, it tends to be less manual, not many human intervention is required and whatnot. And then with security orchestration, it offers a centralized control panel or control location for all security processes. Typically, a security orchestration platform will have another platform above it that's able to monitor it and kind of admin it. Now, typically it is human, however, those do exist. So, what are some of the benefits of security automation? We had talked about it before. It's all based on efficiency as well as reducing human error. It also increases employee happiness and satisfaction. Now, one of the benefits of security orchestration is that, yes, it's still more efficient. There is a faster incident response time, faster and more enhanced threat detection, and more enhanced scalability. The scalability piece is important because when it comes to scalability, that means that these tools have the ability to grow with very little intervention. As you can imagine, when a new employee comes in, an IT person can make their name and make sure they have all the right software and whatnot. But technically speaking, if we're talking about from a technical standpoint and not like physical computer, the automation is already set up with the right rules and the right scripts to add that resource to the correct team, to the correct security groups that they have access to what they need access to. We already talked about that, and we don't have to worry about that. Okay. So let's kind of dig a little deeper into the concept of automation and orchestration. Now, I always mentioned that automation is within orchestration because an automation is something that you automate that doesn't require human interaction, and an orchestration is a group of multiple of these things, right? I already gave you the example of an orchestra, right? So you can keep that concept in mind. Now, if I were to help you kind of like remember or understand the idea of automation and orchestration, it is one vs many. An automation is one automation. It's one tool, one task, one system. An orchestration is many automated tools, many systems, and many tasks, all bunched together, but more controlled and more refined. Okay, so another concept that I think might help is an automation is doing something. The orchestration is asking, are you doing it correctly? Easy way. All right. So when companies, they get created, they get big enough, they say, okay, we want to save our company some money, we want to save some time, we want to make sure the employees are happy. We want to go ahead and start automating a lot of our processes. Well, how do we do that? Where do we start? Well, I always say you start from the ground up, you start with automation. That means that if you want to increase your security posture, well, then you need to make sure that you look at all your manual processes, you look at anything that is impeding your security team from being more efficient, and then you go ahead and identify those things and find a solution that can accomplish it. Most common one is patch management. So if you're trying to automate the patch management process, well, then you identify it and then you choose automation to start with. After you choose that automation, keep in mind, just like how we have security by design, meaning that when you're building an application, you want to not just build the application so that it accomplishes a task, you want to make sure it accomplishes the task securely and doesn't present any potential security risk. Same thing with the concept of automation. With automation, you want to make the automation in such a way that it can build into orchestration, it can scale into orchestration. So even when you start building out your platform, you already want to start thinking about that way, because the more complex it is, the more complex you make the automation at first, the harder it's going to be to scale or grow. So you want to make sure that you set it up in such a way that it's easy to add on more resources or connect more resources to that automation. All right, more question time. So quiz thread. So in this quiz thread, the first question is, what is the key difference between automation and orchestration in security operations? Results say, everyone says C. Good job, everyone. That is correct. Automation addresses single tasks, while orchestration manages workflows, aka automation single, orchestration many. Question number 2. Improved efficiency and productivity are benefits of security automation. What does this imply? Let's see the questions come in. All right. Everyone has selected B. Well done, everyone. That is absolutely correct. So when it comes to the benefits of security, it means security can handle a large volume of security tasks, and they can focus on things that are more important. Good job, everyone. Okay. Now let's talk a little bit more about distinguishing features. So what exactly does that mean? When it comes to distinguishing features, the key things we want to understand is first, automation, single, orchestration, many, right? Now, they both have like their different responsibilities and different areas of concentration given like the scope and whatnot. So we kind of want to understand the scope and range of each one, right? They are very different in their tasks, even though they're related. But one of the key areas to understand when it comes to automation and orchestration is that they operate still close to each other, but still independent of each other. Okay, let me explain. For one, when it comes to concentration and range, right? So an automation is a singular tool, singular system, right? Its primary goal is one singular action or a more concentrated or constrained scope. It's not going to do multiple things. It'll do one specific things and do it well. There's a quote that says, shoot, I'm forgetting the quote. If someone puts it in the chat, that'd be great. It's master of all. Oh shoot, I am really forgetting it right now. I think someone has it. Jack of all trades. That is correct. So it's like you can do many things, but you can't do something super. Yes, that's it. Jack of all trades, master of none. Thank you. That is correct. So when it comes to automation, it's the opposite of jack of all trades. It is they are really good at one specific thing, and that's the only thing that they do. That's their only specific task. Orchestration, on the other hand, would be that. It would be jack of all trades and master of none, in the sense that they're really good at knowing what's going on with everything. They can't do that specific task, but they can coordinate it. They can encourage that specific task and automation to take place. Okay. So it's a lot more broad. It can aim to do a lot more things, but its main point when it comes to orchestration, I mean, is streamlining and efficiency. That's what its main goal is. Speaking of goals and utilization, like I said, a task is meant to do one specific thing. And that one specific thing tends to be in the area of operational efficiency. It's trying to remove any manual security work. It's trying to take away the need for humans to interact with it and do something, because then it takes away the need for human error. The entire focus is centered around speed, it's centered around consistency, and then dependability. The benefit of automation is that it can be done multiple times. It can be something that can be repeated. So if it's repeated, well, then it makes life a lot easier for the actual employee. Now, when it comes to orchestration, its main goal is to coordinate and make sure that all of these automated tasks that are aimed towards efficiency are functioning properly. They're functioning cohesively and they're functioning effectively. It's a very strategic approach, because when you have orchestration, you're literally conducting a whole entire orchestra and bringing them all together with the entire goal of uniformity and efficiency. So they still are both tasked with efficiency, but they're also in their own right, if that makes sense. All right, implementation and complexity. We had talked about this a little bit before. How do you implement an automation? Well, the idea here is that implementing an automation should be pretty straightforward, and it should focus on all of the manual tasks that tend to take a lot of work, right? Now, when you implement an automation, you have to make sure that you define what the automation is, you define what the goal is, and you define exactly what needs to get done. This means making sure there's documentation of it and all that information, and making sure that there are rules set in place, okay? So the implementation process, with one single automation, it wouldn't be too complex. The heavy lifting for an automation comes in the beginning when you are defining it and saying, hey, we should do XYZ. And then it can get it gets a little easier afterwards with like the maintenance and monitoring, because you have to update every once in a while according to any patches. Now, when it comes to orchestration, as you can imagine, it's more complex because you don't have one automation. You may have 20, you may have 30. And all of these automations, keep in mind, it's not just security automations. They can be non-security systems. So that entire workflow, just by a sheer number of automations, can be a lot more complex to implement and have a lot more moving parts. So the implementation of it can be pretty difficult. However, you typically start with automation and then you build into an orchestration. Aligning multiple automation. What if there's contradiction between them? Aha, Mustafa asked a really good question. So let's take an example. Let's say you have let's take the phishing email. So someone clicks a link, and then when they click that link, well, then the first thing that happens is there is an isolation. That device is isolated. But then there's another automation that says, hey, I need to know what that link was, and I can't access that link anymore. Believe it or not, this happens. So one of the easiest ways to think of it is like a firewall. If you all remember, a firewall has specific rules. Those rules happen in a specific order, okay? And if it doesn't follow that specific order, it negates the one before it. So what typically happens when it comes to automation and orchestration is a part of the coordination is giving a priority and a number of, I should say, a list of which automation takes priority when and why. So if there are contradicting or competing automations, well, then you set the one that's most important first, and then the contradicting one or the one that you would want to have a lower priority, a little more down the line. So it's an order of operations concept. That's one of the ways that I've seen some of these automations take place or be listed out. However, it really does depend. Sure, the idea here is we shouldn't and we don't want to have automations that contradict. However, sometimes it does happen. This is why the implementation of an automation and orchestration is so important. You need to define what it is, you need to define what it's doing, and then you need to define how important it is. Okay. And more often than not, a lot of companies that help with this automation, they will literally tell you these are the most important things that you need to have. More often than not, as well, sometimes they'll just remove the contradicting automation if they see that it's causing questions down the line. Very good question, Mustafa. Okay. So, making decisions in context. Now, automations are really, really good at handling menial tasks, simple things that are pretty easy to do. And they are able to make certain choices, like binary choices, such as a yes and no, such as quarantining a machine if they see that there's a specific threat. Now, the choice that this automation has to make is very simple. You don't have to factor in a lot of information. It's as simple as saying, we detected this on this network, we have to go ahead and isolate it. That's all that means, okay? So it doesn't require a lot of knowledge, doesn't require a lot of information. It's just a black and white yes and no. Orchestration, on the other hand, when it comes to decision making, they have to take multiple things into account. First of all, they have to look at every single automation, and then they have to assess the threat level of each one, and then they have to look at the situation of each one to understand its full concept. Now, with that entire decision-making process, the orchestration can then prioritize based on the information that it has on all of those automations. I just want to point out how really cool that is. The fact that an orchestration can do that, that I can look at all those different automations, understand the complexity of it, the situation of it, and then make an informed decision on it moving forward. Okay. So keep in mind that that's a really, really cool tool. Independence and complementary. Now, as we talked about single versus many, a concept that a lot of people kind of forget with automation is because it's a single task, right? It tends to work in its own lane. It tends to be, I wouldn't say like isolated, but I'll say that it's able to work autonomously, right? It doesn't need a lot of input. So it'll do its task and it can function without the orchestration. There are companies out there that don't have any orchestration. They just have automations, and then those automations run on their own and they don't need any management. Okay. What it takes our jobs eventually. Okay. Let's pause and talk about this. I think a lot of people are worried about um, AI taking their jobs, right? So this is one of the things I want to talk about. Let me just make this. Just okay. Never mind. It's fine. Okay. I know some of you are sitting here and you're saying, oh, Andre, we're learning about cybersecurity, we're learning about automation, or we're learning about AI, but AI is just becoming so big and it's becoming such a huge thing. How do we know it's not going to take our job away? Mustafa, I know you were probably like joking, but I want to talk about this because I know it can be a real concern. A lot of people are saying ChatGPT is taking away designer jobs because it can create images, taking away logo jobs, it's taking away um, voiceovers. It's possibly even taking away movies because it can create movies now, right? But the biggest thing that I can tell you about AI and how it's not going to take away your job is the human element of it. Keep in mind, this is why I keep stressing that cybersecurity is a humanistic job. Yes, do you need to know technical terms? Do you need to know port numbers? Sure. However, you need to understand that humans are the only ones who can make the right judgments. There is a movie out there that is called, I think some of you have heard of it. It's I, Robot. It's an older movie, stars Will Smith, and it talks about AI, it talks about robots, and it talks about the humanity of robots, right? Why do I bring this up? It's because there are questions that are asked that can a robot paint a picture? Can a robot, write a symphony? Today, a robot can. And it is quite scary, right? However, there is a human touch that a robot cannot do. First, for example, there's a level of sophistication in cybersecurity that involves a human reaction. It involves a human touch in order to be able to understood. Yes, great, great, great movie, right? The other thing, robots and AI tend to be very black and white, meaning that they tend to think of, oh, it's just data, it's just information, so they go based off information. There is not a nuance in there for strategic and ethical decision making. Just because it is the right thing to do based on AI doesn't mean that's the right thing for the company right then and there. So being able to make those ethical decisions is really important. These decisions and these human elements are some of the biggest reasons why we as humans are still going to be needed. These AI tools and these automation tools are meant to serve us. They're meant to make our lives a lot easier, and they're meant to help us accomplish tasks a lot better so that we can do the human things that matter. The human things that matter, meaning protecting human life. So, no, your jobs are not going to be replaced by AI. Okay. Alex. Human coordination. Yes, exactly. Let me see. Okay. Yeah, I think that answers that question. Okay. Now everyone knows that your job is completely safe. Okay. You all are going to be all right. So let's go ahead and wrap up here. Okay, we already talked about this, so we're good. All right. I think we're headed towards the end here. Okay, good. So quiz. Um, quiz thread. Oh, what's this? Naime says, Andre, this thing, all humans should be update their knowledge at all time. I do think that humans should keep updating their knowledge. Use AI, leverage AI to beat AI. I heard a fellow cybersecurity instructor say that. He said, leverage AI to beat AI. I thought that was really interesting. Okay, quiz thread. Question number 1, A, B, C, or D. Security automation can help reduce human error. Why is this important? Reducing human error. Everyone says B. Human fatigue can lead to missed security vulnerabilities. Let's talk about this for a second. That is very accurate. Now, it's not just human fatigue, right? As you can imagine, AI and automations, they don't need water, they don't need sleep, they don't get tired, they don't need food. We as humans, we do. So they can just work all the time overnight, which is why it's so helpful. We as humans, we can be as healthy as ever and not be tired and still miss something. That is an element of being human. If anything, I would even say that's a beauty of being human, is that we can make mistakes and then we can adjust, we can learn. Whereas AIs tend to be quote unquote perfect. Question number 2, true or false? Automated security tasks can potentially lead to burnout among security analysts. True or false? Automating security tasks can potentially lead to burnout. You're right. It's the opposite. If a security analyst is doing a bunch of security tasks that could have been automated, then they would get burnt out. So it is false. Good job, everyone. All right. So this is the last slide before we'll go into the Kahoot. Now, when it comes to security automation, the definition here is that it is singular. It is specifically one task that it's working towards, okay? And it uses technology to make that one specific task easier to manage because it makes it repeated, it helps organize it into an easily documented, easily understandable, and easily dashboarded format. And then it helps with the organization's overall security operations, SecOps. Why are automations beneficial? Because they are efficient. They tend to make things a lot easier, a lot faster, and that it helps us respond to the things that matter. Also, they tend to be scalable, meaning that they can handle growing volumes of data and then they don't have to burden staff too much to help with it. And then they tend to be easier to add or adjust different users. And then they allow us to focus on the bigger picture. So because all these small repetitive tasks are being taken care of, well, then for us, we just need to concentrate on the more critical issues. Then we already talked about burnout. So what are some use cases of security automations? Well, we have vulnerability management, we have threat detection, we have incident response. All of these are different use cases where security automation is used to leverage a quicker incident response, proactive vulnerability management and threat detection. These are all elements of it. We didn't talk about this too much. I wouldn't worry about it. Security orchestration. Now, if automation is one singular thing, well, then security orchestration is multiple things. It is aggregated all together. Now, the idea here is it is coordinating a bunch of different automations, not just security automations, mind you, but they could be external non-security systems or sources, such as Workday, okay? And all of it builds together because it helps with multiple facets of the overall security posture, such as faster incident response. Because you have aggregated data, that means that your MTTR is a lot lower, mean time to respond. And then integrated technologies. The concept of a uniform workflow means that multiple different tools are working together to have the right access, to have the right information in order to function as a cohesive group. I spoke about the real-time visibility. So you typically have a dashboard that shows you in real time the health of all your automations, all your systems, and your overall security posture. So a security orchestration feeds that information. We talked about efficient threat hunting that allows it to scan a lot easier. And then we talked about consistent incident handling because of the uniformity, response time is lowered, okay? So all of these are the advantages and use cases of security automation and orchestration.